What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. I'm Bob Wankel alongside Anthony Sanfilippo, who is back from his week-plus stint in Florida. Welcome back to the beautiful greater Philadelphia region, Anthony. How are you?
Yeah, it's a little bit different here than it was there. Yeah,
A little bit different. You actually missed a wretched stretch of weather up here, too. So at least when you landed yesterday, you got like 58 and sunny, but it has not been awesome up here. I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, the last couple days, with yesterday aside, the last couple days in Clearwater actually weren't great. We had some rain, a little bit of rain on Wednesday. It was chilly. Like I actually had to put on long sleeves while I was down there.
It's chilly. Was it like 64?
No, it actually was in the upper 50s. It was actually in the upper, and the evenings were colder. I mean, like those 2 days, it got down to probably like upper 40s. Those 2 days, but I can't complain. The rest of the time was 80 degrees and beautiful during the day, and 65 at night, and sit outside to eat. It was great. It was awesome.
Yeah, obviously we recorded earlier in the week and we talked about some of your observations down there. But the reason why I sort of, bring it up and say, hey, you're back from Clearwater is now that you're back and you've had some time to sort of process and digest everything that you saw down there. I guess let me pose a question to you in this way. Mm-hmm. Are you more optimistic, more concerned, or about where you were when you first departed to go to Clearwater in terms of where this team's at entering the season?
Well, I'm going to hedge slightly, Bob, because I think a lot in my mind depends on what comes out as far as Ranger Suarez and what he's able to do. Yeah, there are concerns because their pitching depth got depleted in the last couple of weeks, like significantly so. And so, of course, that's an issue, right? But Nola looked pretty good in his last outing. Wheeler looked good yesterday. They're both ramping up. Guy we haven't even talked about, and only because he hasn't been with the Phillies in camp. But man, Taijuan Walker's start in the World Baseball Classic was something that you should be, really excited about. It was a really good start in a competitive environment, right? So that's good. So I mean, you look at that. I mean, if they can get Suarez back and he's healthy and there's no real issues from this arm tightness, and they seem to think like it's going to be the case. He went 3 straight days throwing, twice off flat ground, and then he did long toss yesterday. As long as there's no ramification from that and they can build him back up and get him ready to start the season, then I'm probably where I was all along, because the bats have been fine. Like they've really been, for the most part, hitting the ball. But if Suarez can't come back and we start here, well, he's going to need a little bit of time, might not be ready to start the season. And now Bailey Falter becomes your 4 and Michael Plasmeyer becomes your 5. Then I start to go, well, that's not the most ideal situation.
Well, it does seem like this is trending in a cautiously optimistic and positive direction for Ranger Suarez. As you said, he's thrown multiple days in a row. Long toss on the 16th on Thursday. I guess my question is, did you get any additional read? Like, I know right now the messaging is we'll see where he's at on Friday, on St. Patrick's Day. If all goes well, maybe he progresses to a bullpen sometime next week. And then the idea is that he starts the season on the opening day roster, may not be fully ready, may not even go his first time through the rotation, but that this is almost just a minor delay that they can kind of survive by manipulating the off days early in the season, not a situation where it's going to require an IL stint. If he goes on the IL, I will be a little bit concerned by that. And whether or not that's obvious, I don't know, but this is one of these situations where you're like, okay, are we talking about being delayed by 10 days or being delayed by 40 days?
Right. Now that's a fair point. And I think that you're right on with that. And yeah, I would still be optimistic if they say, look, he's not going to slot right into that number 3 spot where you kind of expected him. We're going to kind of treat him like the number 5 starter for the first week or 2 of the season, just to kind of make sure that he's built up enough and ready to go. Okay. I'm still good with that. Right. I mean, I'm still comfortable with that being the case. So yeah, no, I would be cautiously optimistic. The only other thing is they've lost so much depth that they really don't even have a long guy, in the bullpen at this point. They really aren't going to have anyone. They're going to have to build up, and Thompson talked about this. They're going to have to build up guys who are normally 1 inning guys, could go a little longer, maybe an inning and a third, inning 2/3, those kind of guys. They're going to have to build them up a little bit to maybe, if needed, be able to throw 3 innings if necessary, especially early in the season. And names that he mentioned, I mean, he mentioned Marte as because I think that's the guy that's going to get the last bullpen spot at this point. But he mentioned him, he mentioned Brogdon, mentioned Bellotti, mentioned Strom. So those 4 guys are the guys that the Phillies are going to try and get multiple innings out of, or longer innings out of, that aren't traditionally long relievers. So I mean, that's if you're looking for one kind of maybe red flag, like, oh, they don't really have that guy. That's maybe the thing that you sit there and say, I don't know where that's going to go as you go into the season.
Yeah, and as you kind of look at where this thing stands right now, injuries are becoming part of the picture. They are becoming part of the conversation, but they're sort of right on the brink. Like you talked about depth. They are having their depth tested right now on these fringe pieces, back end of the bullpen. Do they have to kind of dance around 2 weeks into the season, make the starting pitching work? But they haven't really had that massive injury that has an immediate impact on what the product looks like, the way that a team up the turnpike has here in recent days. And we can get to that in a moment. I actually have a couple questions for you and like to talk about what happened in the World Baseball Classic with Edwin Diaz. But I think that's where I'm at right now. I'm not overly concerned because these aren't things that should be bleeding into the opening day product, but they could be issues down the line. When you look at a guy like Nick Nelson, now I don't know about your latest roster projection, but I didn't have Nick Nelson making the opening day roster. I did not.
No, neither did I. He wasn't having a great spring. And then he has, we didn't know what the injury was. We just know that he wasn't being used in a handful of games, and then all of a sudden it's a hamstring injury, and it's a pretty big one, and it's going to keep him out for a little while. So I mean, Nick Nelson came into camp as a guy that they were mentioning as a potential candidate for the number 5 spot, that they weren't going to look at. And so you kind of thought, okay, well, if he doesn't win that, he could probably kind of slot into the role he was last year, which is that last guy in the bullpen, long reliever. And then all of a sudden he's not throwing. And that becomes now what? Now where does Nick Nelson go? And we were like, I guess this guy's they don't like him enough to make the team. It turns out that he's got a pretty good hamstring injury. So I didn't have him. I didn't think he was going to make the team, but certainly now he's going to start the season on the IL.
So I think now is actually a pretty good point to talk about where things sit in the NL East and where the Phillies kind of stack up at the moment. Like, we haven't made predictions to this point. We're not making predictions today. But one thing that's interesting is obviously the Mets lose one of the best closers in the game. And I know that you and I both talked a couple weeks ago about Edwin Diaz and potential regression. Could he have another season that he had last year? And I don't know if he could or he couldn't. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that he was arguably one of the 2 or 3 best closers, if not the best closer in all of baseball last year. And he is a massive weapon that can shorten games. And now the Mets don't have him. And I know that the Mets have talent. I know that they have other options in that bullpen, but I don't think that you can overstate the importance of that and the significance of that injury. And my immediate thing is, wow, this potentially opens the door for the Phillies, or this potentially really opens the door for the Braves, who a lot of people kind of think are really the true favorite in this division anyway, because they've run it for so long. I guess my initial question, because this is a Phillies podcast, is, does this injury make the path easier for the Phillies, or is it an oversimplification to just say, big injury, hey, it just got a lot easier?
Yeah, well, look, you know me, right? I'm one of those few people who's not always been as high on the Mets as everyone else is. I'm not trying to say that they weren't a good team or still aren't a good team. I think they are. I just don't think that they are what everybody, every year makes them out to be. Like, oh, this team's going to be unstoppable. I always see flaws in their setup, and I still do. And I felt that the bullpen for the Mets was a flaw this year, even with Diaz at the back end. Now you take him out of it. Of course, Steve Cohen could go out and say, hey, trade for some guy who's got some ridiculous contract, and I don't care, I'll still pay it. And maybe the Mets do bring in a guy that can kind of fill that role from another team that becomes available. Okay, fine. But I'm not a fan of the rest of their bullpen. I'm not confident in a David Robertson. I'm not confident in Adam Ottavino. I mean, he's a guy who's had some fluctuation in his career as well. And the rest of their pen's not that great. So I look at it and say, I didn't think that they were that great to begin with, but now you take their best reliever out of the mix. And their starters are older, who don't throw 7, 8, 9 inning games anymore. I mean, who's getting you to the end of the game? I just don't see it. So yeah, I do think, Bob, I do think that this is a difference maker enough under the current roster conditions to say the Phillies, and I had the Phillies ahead of the Mets anyway in the division. In my mind, I thought that the Braves are still, and I still think the Braves are the class of the division. But I thought the Phillies and Mets would be close, but I thought that the Phillies would maybe just be a little bit better. I think now that there's a gap. Wow. I do, and I think it's because of a very weak bullpen in New York.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I immediately went to a couple of the different sportsbook apps, and I said, did this really shift the odds? Like, did this have a seismic impact on what we're looking at and how this thing's going to play out? And the odds makers don't really see it that way. I mean, what has happened in effect here is the Braves have sort of distanced themselves from the Mets as the clear-cut favorite now to win the division. And to just put some numbers behind it, you have plus 115 on Atlanta to win the NL East. The Mets have moved to plus 175. And the Phillies are still sitting there plus 340. And I guess there's a few things. I'm like, well, wow, like this didn't really give the Phillies any bump. That's weird. But it's hard for me to not get over somebody that pays attention. And like, for those of you that don't know, I work in the sports betting space. It is my career. And I look at plus 340 and I can't tell if this is great value on the Phillies or if it's outright disrespectful of the Phillies or if it's telling. I kind of find myself.
Well, all right, so
go ahead.
Okay. You're the betting expert more so than me, but I mean, I look at it and I'm trying to rationalize why it hasn't really moved the needle for the Phillies as far as the betting line. And I guess my question to you back on this is, since the odds are to win the division, right? It's not necessarily saying this doesn't affect the Phillies as far as their standing in the division. It's just saying that the Braves are still such an overwhelming favorite that the Phillies number hasn't moved. Like you're comparing the Braves to the Phillies, which is why the Phillies number is what it is. And yeah, okay, the Mets, maybe they take a slight step back, but it doesn't affect the difference between the Phillies and the Braves, right?
And that makes sense to a degree. So you are looking at the Phillies relative to the Braves, but because this is a 3-horse race and because there's that in-between team, typically that in-between team coming down in odds will bring that third team a little bit closer.
Yeah.
But, I think that there's also something to be said for the fact that you're looking at Steve Cohen. This is an owner that does things in a different way. I think the assumption here is that if they are competitive moving through the early summer, that they would make a trade to try to fortify the back end of that bullpen. I wouldn't be surprised if the Mets did one much earlier than we're accustomed to seeing. Like, I think that there's definitely a mentality in there that's like, we are trying to win the World Series. If I have to do things more aggressively, overpay, plug this hole, like, I'm going to do it. And he might not follow that traditional methodology of let's wait 3.5 months, see where we're at, address our needs, and go from there.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say, and Bob, this is, maybe we're diving a little bit too much into betting philosophies, right, and setting lines and why they are what they are. But is this a situation, and you could tell me I'm wrong if I am, where because it's a New York team and a lot of the way the money gets bet on New York teams maybe a little bit differently than others, that's part of it too, that's why that line hasn't moved as much as you would think off of an injury like this?
Yeah, I think that there's always a little bit of that. We talk about that more in football, right? With like a team like the Cowboys,
Right.
you're always going to have to buy an extra half a point or point in value, or pay an extra point in value if you want to, bet the Cowboys on the point spread. And so could there be a little bit of that, especially with the hype and some of the names that are tagged to this team, the owner being who he is, the way that he's operated? I think there's definitely like this totally unwarranted, like totally undeserved, but there's like this mystique around the Mets for some reason right now where, the Mets, So I think that there could be a little bit of a perception part of it that plays into this. So I guess we'll see how it goes here, but I do kind of, and the reason why I mentioned the betting odds, because this isn't a betting podcast, it's not a gambling podcast, I get that. But like there is part of me as we inch towards the back end of this month, like opening day, we're 2 weeks away from it. And we are going to start talking about what we think is going to happen this season. We are going to start making those predictions. And I'm almost mystified that you had this Phillies team that made the run that it did a year ago, that has the star power, like the firepower that this team has. Like this isn't the 93 Phillies. It's not like the lovable ragtag bunch that, found a way to make it work. Like they're a high paid, big salary, big star power team. And I just feel like everyone's like, yeah, it was a fluke. They suck. Like from a national perspective, like, and then they go out and they add Trey Turner. To me, like, I don't know what the Phillies are going to do yet. Like, I'm not there. Like, I don't have a number for you yet. I don't have like they're going to make the NLCS yet. I haven't really zeroed in on that. But what I do know is it feels like from a national perspective, this team is being discounted, like discredited a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't, from a national perspective, there's no Bryce Harper for the first half of the season. And I think you look at that and you say, he was such a catalyst for them in the playoffs last year. Obviously, he was their best player. You take him out of the mix, and yeah, you did add Turner, but Turner's a different dynamic. He's not Bryce Harper, especially with the power, especially from the left side. Like, okay, they're going to be there. They're going to be in it. They're going to be part of the conversation. But just, flopping in Turner for Harper for a half a year might not be enough to compete at the level you need to compete at to challenge the Braves in this division. And I think that's why I honestly think it's that simple as to why people are quote unquote disrespecting the Phillies. I think that there's a real, but we've had a lot. Look, I'll tell you this. This is one of the things we talked about, off the air. There was not a big local media presence down there with the Phillies, which is a little bit surprising, right? Because of how much interest and popularity there is, but that's the nature of the industry, unfortunately, at this point. But there was a greater national presence while I was down there. MLB Network Radio was there one day when I was there. Jason Stark was there a couple of times when I was there. Buster Olney was there for a couple of days following the team around. So you started to see a little bit more of a national presence with this team. So yeah, I think that there's a little bit of national disrespect, but I also do feel like they recognize that they recognize that this is a team that's going to be there in the end, probably, and they're an interesting team that could potentially, last year might not have just been a fluke. Let's put it that way. And I think that from that perspective, I still think that it's there, that they buy into the Phillies. So I'm with you a little bit on the disrespect thing, but I don't think it's a complete like, oh, this team sucks. I think that I think it's more of, yeah, they're good.
Maybe not disrespected, but like almost undervalued.
Yeah, undervalued.
Undervalued a little bit.
Yeah. Well, look at the over-under total. Again, when we go back to the betting thing, their over-under total is the same number of wins they had a year ago.
Right.
Like, that's crazy to me. I think you've got to bet the over if you're going to bet that game, bet the Phillies, right? If you want to bet the win total for the year, regardless of what our predictions are going to be in 2 weeks, you've got to bet the over. This team has to win more games than it won last year for two reasons. One, they're likely not getting off to an 8-game under 500 start in the first 50 games that they're going to have to overcome, right? Number one. And number two, ultimately, when Harper gets back, and you and I know, and I'm going to say no, we know he's coming back sooner than the day that they're giving us. Okay, barring a setback, he will be back before the All-Star break. Craig, cut it up, have the video ready, because when he comes back in June, we will play it that we're both saying this. He's going to be back in June, okay? But even once he comes back, this lineup is top to bottom, top 3 or 4 in the game. Like, really that good. So I don't, again, looking at it from this point in the season, at this point, not knowing if there's going to be any major injuries going forward, they have to win more games, at least one more game than last year, right? I just think that's a gimme.
And I think you get up around that number, though. And like you said, they get off to this atrocious start. I think at one point they were 9 games under a year ago. But you do have Rob Thompson, 111 games. He takes over, and they go 65-46 over 111 game stretches, 19 games over. I mean, can they sustain that pace? Right? Like, are the Phillies going to play at that type of pace? I mean, I don't have the win percentage, 586 win percentage. Like, are they going to play at that pace over 162? Does it kind of just even out where, like, maybe they don't have that run, that peak success the way they did a year ago, but they don't dig themselves the hole, and then in the end, it all turns out to be 88 wins. I don't know.
Well, the other thing, Bob, I think, and Dave Dombrowski talked about this couple weeks ago, I think it was. Now it might be even a little bit more than that. It might have been prior to the start of spring training. All these days are running together, but a lot of times when you have these projections that are made, right, and whether it's Fangraphs projections or the betting lines projection or whoever, all the computer models that are out there, I think that there's a real lack of foresight in growth, right, of certain players that's not taken into consideration. I think that he's spot on with that. I think a lot of projections are based off of what the past was and not so much of what the future can be. Okay. And so when you look at guys like Alec Bohm and Brandon Marsh and Bryson Stott, 3 young players who are getting better with each year that goes by, you're not giving the Phillies any credit for that. Right. I mean, the fact that these guys are going to do it, and not just the Phillies. I mean, any team really. It's funny when I look at, projections for all teams, I'm like, man, they really undervalue this team or undervalue these players. And it's true. They don't really project out to the growth of the younger player. Right. And the Phillies have 1/3 of their lineup is young guys who are getting better. And look, Derek Hall, we talked about him last week. Another big day yesterday, right? In spring training. He's going to be in this lineup likely for a lot of these games without Harper. And so there's another young player that's going to probably get better. So you look at these guys and say, well, yeah, I mean, that has to be taken into consideration too. And I don't think it is. So that's why, to me, I think that the Phillies over, 87.5, right? Or 87. Is that the number right now? Yep. It's a gimme. It's a gimme if you're a betting person. I think you got to take the over.
Yeah, and like even if you're a big Zips projection guy, I don't know if you're a big Zips guy or not, but like 85 wins for the Phillies.
Yeah.
46.7% chance to make the postseason. So those projections are telling you that it is more likely than not that the Phillies will miss the playoffs. Yeah, I don't see that.
I don't either.
I would be to be honest, I would be surprised if I'd be very surprised if the Phillies missed the playoffs. I'd be very surprised if the field that comprised or, made up last year the National League playoff picture wasn't exactly the same this year.
Hey, it's the same.
I don't see any deviation whatsoever.
No, I think it's the same 6 teams. Milwaukee's the only one that's kind of like a maybe that could sneak in.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I don't see any other team. I like where Arizona's going. I think that they're getting there. I think that's a team that could open some eyeballs a little bit this year with their young talent. I mean, they have 2 good young starting pitchers there that nobody really pays attention to, and Gallen and Kelly. Yeah. But yeah, they're not quite there yet either in my mind. So yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the 6 teams that were in there last year. Milwaukee's a maybe sneak in if something goes wrong, and Arizona's a long shot dark horse that could be more dangerous a year from now.
Who are the other teams that would even be on the fringe of this conversation? I know there's some belief that the Cubs, are on their way back.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe the Giants do their every other year thing.
I don't like that Giants. I don't like that Giants team. I really don't. The Cubs are the one other team that maybe gets into that conversation. So that really 7, 8, 9, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Arizona. That's it. I mean, but they're not. I don't think that they're in for the long haul. I really don't.
So I have a couple questions about two players specifically. We're at the point in the spring where we've pretty much talked about everybody, what our sense is of them or what we hope to see out of them moving forward. But you talked about that growth and the potential of it. Bryson Stott got off to a pretty rough start this spring, and he really struggled in the World Series a year ago. You look at the stat numbers and you kind of just say, I don't, it's not overly impressive.
Yeah.
But I think we all, if you watch that team play down the stretch, like you respected something about his game that didn't show up in the numbers, the ability to work counts, work pitchers, foul off pitches, come up with some big hits. We've talked about the it factor with him frequently. He hits the leadoff homer last night, has a couple hits. Looks like he's finally getting his footing a little bit. Did you come away with anything from your time down there? Like, did you talk to him? Did you get like a sense looking at him up close and personal, like this guy is going to take a step forward? Or you kind of just like in a wait and see, like he should be incrementally better. We'll see what happens.
No, I think he's going to be better. I think he's going to suddenly turn into an all-star like overnight? No, I don't. But that doesn't mean he can't be better than what he was last season. And I think a lot of what you saw in the second half of last year is what Bryson Stott's going to be. I mean, he's going to be a guy who the Phillies should expect to hit 250, 260, bottom of the lineup, have a little bit of pop, right? Can provide and take some pitches at really good professional at bats, play really solid defense at second base, and just be a guy that you can rely on to be a regular in your lineup. Like he's not going to hurt your lineup. I don't see that. And I really like, a lot of people forget too, Bob, that he's a little bit older for a young player, for a quote unquote young player, right? I mean, he's already 25, turns 26 this season. So yeah, he's entering his second year, but he's a little bit older than most second year players in the game. And so I think that his approach and his mental approach to the game is a lot further along. It's a lot more advanced than most second year players would be. So I'm not going to sit here and project him to be some massive breakout candidate. I don't see that, but at the same time, I also don't see him being a guy that struggles like he did early in the season last year, like he did during the World Series. I think that he's a guy that's going to be a very solid contributor to this lineup, batting 8th or 9th every day.
Did Alec Bohm look bigger to you?
He does.
Is that real?
It's real. He's physically in bigger guy. Just he's in better shape. He's muscular now. Like he added on some weight, but it's muscle weight. I mean, and he just looks more like a specimen. And you're seeing it with the way how he hits the ball. Like it's just the power that he has, the drive off the bat. I mean, it's not about hitting home runs particularly, but it's the way he's hitting the ball hard, and you could just see it. And then just watching every day that they played at home. We would go up to you have the morning, availability, and for like an hour, and then you have a few hours before the game, so you're not going to go home. You go sit up in the press box and you watch the BP, and man, it's just one. And I know it's BP, but it was impressive. Bohm was really impressive every time I saw him go out there.
I don't know who had it this week. I read a story. Some scouts that have seen him this spring are starting to talk about 25, 30 home run potential. I think that you and I said a number around like 22, 23.
I'd be thrilled with that. Yeah.
No, and I would be thrilled with that if he turns himself into a 30 home run hitter though.
That's a different story. That's another level.
Hit somewhere around 280 or a shade above. I mean, that's a different level of player that we're talking about here. And one that I didn't think, even as recently as his resurgence a year ago, I still didn't see that type of ceiling. So would be, not unprecedented, but certainly just an ascension that we've not seen very often for him. And you're talking about third overall pick, a guy that certainly comes in with some God-given talent, but I didn't see any of that with him.
Yeah, no, that would be an absolute game changer for him personally,
Because
and even for the Phillies, if that's what he became.
Remember when we lauded him, his rookie year, and at his best, it was patient approach, willing to use all fields. But we never talked about him as being anything more than a 15, 20 homer guy. At best, maybe he shoots some balls into the gap. He becomes more of a doubles hitter.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation of 25, 30 home runs, though, I guess
that's
10 pounds of muscle, which I rolled my eyes at when that story came out. I said, oh my God, here we go. Best shape of my life, 10 pounds of muscle. But his frame, I guess, would support that. And that's what makes him unique. I mean, because you say he looks like a specimen. I'll be honest with you, stand next to him a year ago, he wasn't exactly like wiry, but
I mean, he was more, you're right. He wasn't wiry, but he was more
like lean cut.
Yeah, he was more big, kind of like he was big and a little more gangly, if that's the right word, right? Now he's cut, man. He's hit that weight room and he's built up. I mean, he's doing a good job with from a physical perspective. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have one more for you here before we roll or whatever else you want to get to. You wrote a story this week about Nick Castellanos, and obviously he's been a frequent topic of conversation on this podcast. And, you have not, at least to my knowledge, really had an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one or for an extended period of time previously. And we sort of just speculated about who he is and how he is and what he's gone through and where he might be headed this season. And I guess, for those that didn't read Anthony's story, Anthony, why don't you kind of give everyone the sort of gist of what you wrote and just your impressions and observations, what you came away from the conversation with Nick Castellanos.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation, Bob. And it was kind of a little bit unexpected that, because Nick has always been kind of a guy who just kind of gives you the, and I hate to use this term, but like the meathead answers, right? Like it was just like, see ball, hit ball, that kind of guy, right? I mean, and that's whatever, and that's fine. I mean, that's just who he is. And then you go over and you start talking to him, and he's got like this whole new approach, this whole Zen mentality of, and he was sitting there explaining to he said, and this was the most important quote to me of all. He said, "This is the most important spring training for me." Because it's a matter of doing something differently than he had ever known before. He said, I should just go up there. He said, I never looked for pitches. I never thought about what pitch the batter was going to throw. I was just going up there and, get my bat on the ball and just drive it somewhere. Ever since I was in high school, that's what I always have done. Now he's thinking about it a little bit. Now he's got an idea, an approach, and he's narrowed. We talked about closing his box, right? And you know what that means. But for the people listening, if they don't know, he's limiting the area that he is looking for a ball to hit. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going up there looking to walk. It's just that he's not going to swing at a pitch that's not going to be in his box. That's the goal. I mean, obviously there's still going to be a few of those, right? But there's that are out of the box. But at the same time, that is what his whole concentration has been this spring. And yeah, he did get off to a slow start as far as if you look at batting average, right? And he did strike out, I think it was 11 times in his first 28 plate appearances or something like that. But you could see a progression now. And he leads the team in walks. He has 8. And I think it's in 34 plate appearances now. He does have a couple home runs. The last few games, he's now made really solid contact a lot, not striking out. It's just a thing where they're longer at bats. He's being more selective, and it's not what you expect from Nick Castellanos, and he's been committed to it the entire month that he's been there. And you sit there and say sometimes players tell you they're going to do that, and they do it for a few games, and then they quickly fall back into their bad habits. And who knows? Maybe the beginning of the season, once the games start counting and the numbers matter, maybe he does fall back into those bad habits. But what we're seeing in spring training has been a commitment to this, and he hasn't wavered from it. And so that's what I'm impressed by.
Do you think that commitment is born out of the failure of a year ago? Do you think that there's a sense of internal accountability where the player is basically saying, like, I I owe it to my teammates, to this organization, to not be the player I was a year ago, because not all guys, not all athletes think that way.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I still think it's something that the Phillies kind of mandated with him. And I'll give you very little evidence that I'm going to go with that assumption. When Rob Thompson was asked about Castellanos, and he was, saying all the things that I just said about his approach and everything else that he's doing. And I followed up by asking him, I said, Rob, is this something that you guys wanted to see more out of him, being more selective at the plate and taking more pitches? And he goes, no, not necessarily. I just don't want him swinging at balls. That's all he said. Right. But if that's what he's saying, that's the conversation that they've had with him. Right. We don't want you swinging at pitches out of the strike zone. Stop it. Just focus on swinging at strikes. You're going to be a good hitter if you do. And so ultimately that's, he's got to trust what they're telling him. And again, through camp to this point, he has. It's not had the batting average results that they've wanted, but that, again, he's not looking at numbers at this point. It's more of the fact that he's finding ways to get on base. And I think it's important if the team recognizes the importance of this, because without Harper, Castellanos is going to be in the middle of the lineup. And he even said it. They've told him he's going to be in the middle of the lineup. Now, whether that's 4 or 5, we don't know yet, but that's the spot he's going to be in, and they're going to need him to be a run producer. And so therefore he has to have that kind of, approach when he's going up there to bat, because he's going to have a chance at bringing runs.
I don't know if you have anything else that you want to hit on before we get out of here. I don't know if you have one last thing or not.
I do. Okay. Well, I have one quick Phillies thing, and then I do have one last thing. Sure. They're kind of similar, and they're kind of related. We're talking about tie-ins to new things in baseball. And one of the things I wanted to bring up with you, and I thought was really kind of interesting, this stemmed from the game against the Yankees on Wednesday, when Nola pitched. He was really talking a lot about, the biggest concern for him as he's building up is the up downs, right? How much time between innings that he's sitting down on a bench and then getting up to throw again. And they pointed out, and both he and Rob Thompson pointed out that, he did his pregame warm-up, his whole routine ready to go. And in the top of the first inning in that game, Phillies had 12 batters. Yankees used 3 pitchers, 2 pitching changes. It was a long-ass inning. And he was sitting for 40 minutes at least on that dugout from the time he had last thrown a warm-up pitch. And the new rules have it that, it's only 2:05 now, 2 minutes and 5 seconds between innings, and that a pitcher has to throw his last warm-up pitch by the 30-second mark prior to that. So you really have less than 90 seconds now to warm up between innings. And so the fact is he sat for 45 minutes and then had to go out there, and they wanted him to throw his warm-up in less than 90 seconds. And so Thompson asked the home plate umpire, can he, turn off the clock? And the umpire said no. And he says, it's spring training, man. This is one of our guys. This is our guy. And he's been sitting for 45. He's risking injury if you don't give him a little bit more time. So the umpire agreed, said, listen, I'll do it. I'll do it because it's spring training. He said, regular season, though, we can't do that. And so Thompson said, this has to be addressed with Major League Baseball. Not just because of Nola, but for any pitcher, really. You're in a situation where you want to speed up the game. Okay, we get it. But if you have a long inning, an umpire should have the discretion to say, okay, your pitcher needs a little extra time. Not like they're asking for.
Well, is it umpire discretion, or do they have to bake in a rule that says, listen, if a half an inning goes over 28 minutes, then an extra moment will be allotted to the starting pitcher, or any pitcher, I guess, at that point to come in and get that extra time. On the flip side of it, I'd say then maybe it's on the team, and they need to accommodate it and say hey, listen, we need to have another catcher in a tunnel. And, if we hit a certain time period, go get stretched out underneath. Yeah. I don't know. There's going to have to be something. Rob Thompson's right. You can't have a guy sit there for 45 minutes icing up and then have to go let it rip. That you run injury risk there. But, baseball is either going to have to adjust or the teams are going to have to adjust.
Yeah, I think it would be better if baseball adjusted in this instance. Don't force teams, because I'll think about it, Bob. You're right. I mean, that the answer is that they're going to have to go into the tunnel and have a pitcher throw a little bit, right, to stay loose. But now they're all now those are more pitches, quote unquote, that warm up pitches that are being thrown. That's going to be less time that they're actually going to be staying in the game.
Yeah, because you don't know, you can't time it up perfectly. Like, say
Right.
you go at the 32-minute mark, like, hey, I'm going to go let a couple rip here, stay warm. And, then the inning extends another 11 minutes. There's an injury, there's a pitching change, and now you're cold again. Like, so, yeah, I mean, I think it probably does make the most sense to let it play out on the field and just cook a rule. And it says, you reach a certain time limit, you have to afford the pitcher additional time to get ready.
Yes, I think that's the case. I think you have to sit there and say it won't hurt us to add a minute in there so that pitcher can throw. Look, I think that 8 warm-up pitches is what it used to be prior to pitch clock between innings, right? No matter the length. And no one ever complained about that. I think that if you just revert back to that and say, okay, 8 warm-up pitches.
How did it feel watching it in person? Like on TV, like you go, it's a little quicker. Did you like with your eyes actually on it live say like, damn, this is moving. It's pretty crisp, like in and out between innings.
Well, not the Yankees game. That was 3 hours and 26 minutes. That was a slog. That was craziness. Yeah, no, you do notice it. I mean, you notice it. I'll tell you, I still think they're rushing it a little bit too much in the game. I think that it could probably, be a little bit slower. Like instead of 15, maybe 20 when there's nobody on base, and instead of 20, maybe 30 when there's somebody on base. Like I think those numbers can be just adjusted a little bit and would still knock time off the game and be fine. It does feel a little bit quick to me. And from a baseball perspective, I think that's you're hearing guys talk about like, yeah, it's, can't we were trained our whole lives to do this way, and now we can't do that, right? So, but Harper said, for example, he said he thinks that these rules will evolve too. That he thinks that they'll eventually, find a happy medium. So I think while they're rushing it, I think that you're also going to see games eventually go back the other direction a little bit. It's not going to get back to the average of 315 or 310, but instead of being 230, it might be 240, right? Or 245. Right. But you're still saving time from what you had. It just may not be as quick as these spring training games are going. So that's the one thing. One last thing, and this is actually probably a positive. And so we'll end on a positive note with Major League Baseball. I don't know if you saw the story, but the MLB has partnered with Zoom, and they are going to now allow fans watching the games on TV to be able to see and hear all the video replay and the conversation between the umpires and the guys in the booth. And I think that's a great thing, because you never really know why a call is made. Like you kind of guess, and the broadcasters kind of throw you kind of maybe a bone after the fact, saying, well, we hear that it's because of rule XYZ that this is why this rule was. But you could now be able to hear the entire conversation, and this is something that has kind of like taken place in smaller sports, or even things like the freaking XFL, right?
The XFL, yeah, Dean Blandino working through it. He sucks, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, and we kind of laugh at those leagues, but they are trying these things out, and I love that. I think this is great, right?
Terrific innovation. I mean, I actually watched. I don't know if I should admit this, but I watched some of the XFL the first couple weekends, and one of the things I really liked was the fact that though he was horrible at explaining in real time what he was looking at, it was kind of cool to get that insight. I would love to see the NFL do that. Like as soon as you started saying that, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I know we're talking about the Phillies, we're talking about Major League Baseball, but my mind immediately went to the NFL, and I was like, I would love to hear those conversations,
For sure.
But yeah, I think that's a great thing. And, this is the type of stuff that baseball has always kind of been, dragged for in the past, that there's never any innovation. It's just so traditional. There's just no creativity. So to get a development like this, I think is not only cool in a vacuum, but I also hope that it's indicative of like a willingness to be a little bit more, I don't know, daring, a little bit more willing to open up the curtain a little bit.
Well, I think transparency is huge, right, in a lot of ways, because I mean, there is that fringe belief out there that that the sport tries to fix,
The
sports try to
script.
fix things. There's scripts and everything. So when you have these transparencies, it completely debunks that, right? So you're going to sit there and you're going to hear these conversations, and you're not going to hear, well, we want this team to win, so to make this call. You're going to hear an actual rule analysis and explanation as to why this is happening in real time, so that there is not going to be. So I think that that's a huge benefit, and probably, Bob, is the reason that it's happening is because of gambling on the sport.
I was going to bring it back up, and I just was like, well, do we really want to go down the gambling?
But it's the truth,
trail?
right? I mean, that's why it's happening.
I've said for a long time that the moment that you legalize online sports betting, you owe the consumer transparency. It's not just my team got screwed, but you're putting real regulated money that gets taxed by the government in play. You have to be as transparent and as forthcoming and reassuring that the product is legitimate as you possibly can. So I think that additional insight certainly will help alleviate that. And if you're not a gambler, then you just stand to benefit by additional access, which is entertaining.
Correct. I think it's a big win. I think that's a good thing for Major League Baseball.
Well, we are marching along here through spring training. We're almost there. I don't know about you. I will be honest. I actually have enjoyed this month. I've enjoyed doing these shows on a consistent basis. I'm proud of us. But I needed to start for real now. I needed to be go time. I'm down with the camp battles and what can you see from Bryson Stott and Alec Bohm's physique, but I need something to react to. I need to get excited and I need to get angry.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing I can kind of glean from my last day down there is they just want to get there too. Like
you have to hit a little bit of a rut here now, right? Where you're like, all right, we've been down here for a month, we've been playing games for 3 weeks. Let's roll.
Yeah, I mean they really do. I mean it's just about staying healthy in a lot of ways. I mean, Nola and talked about, and I didn't get a chance to talk to Wheeler because I left before the game. It was a night game against the Tigers yesterday. But Nola was saying, like, look, I got 2 starts left. He's the next to last one will be the one that, we really ramp up. And then after that, it's just, just don't get hurt. Just don't get hurt. And they'll do like a simulated game on the backfield to really kind of like, control the up downs a little bit there, right? But they're going to do that with their pitchers. But that's it. Like they want to. Garrett Stubbs. We talked to him yesterday. It looks like his injury is not bad, and he's going to be ready for the start of the season. But it's just like, he's like, yeah, regular season, I'm go. Here we're like, stay healthy. I'm just going to rest. Just stay healthy. That's all that they're saying.
I have one question for you then, and then we can get out of here.
Yeah.
But in light of what happened to Edwin Diaz, I don't need to have the conversation with you of like, should they cancel the World Baseball Classic moving forward? I don't even really care to have that conversation. Are you rooting for Team USA, or would you like to say, hey, they got out of pool play, come on home, boys?
Yeah, I know you don't want to see them get hurt. The one thing I will say is that, and I don't understand. I mean, I guess they feel the need to make everybody happy, but they're just alternating the players. I mean, other than Trout and Betts, I think like every other position player.
It's just tough. You have these high-profile guys, and maybe when they get into these elimination games, they just say we're rolling with the best guys. But I think that Team USA and whatever I guess rule or authority Mark DeRosa actually has, I think that there's 2 things here. One, you don't want to overexert the players this time of year. They're not playing every day in spring training, so you're not going to ask them to play 3-4 straight days in the World Baseball Classic. But then you're also asking some big name guys. Like, if you bring Tim Anderson into the fold, like, can you really ask him to play one of the 4 games behind Trey Turner because he's not as good? Right. I just feel like if you're going to bring these guys down there or out there, then you kind of, I don't know that you owe it to them to play them, but like, I feel like you have to play them.
Yeah, but I think that's what the 4 games were about. Now you get into the elimination round. I think you play your best guys. But I mean, I think like you, Bob, I'm not that concerned about it. We know what the United States is at its. If we had every best player there, it would be tough to beat them. The fact that they don't.
If they get knocked out in the elimination round, they don't make the final, or is that like a referendum on the United States baseball right now? Like,
no, it's not.
And that's what, like, when people talk about like the importance, and obviously the players are into it, and that's awesome. Like, I'm actually pleasantly surprised by the I guess the want to that's coming from a lot of them. But that's why I don't think in the long run it truly matters here, because if they get bounced, it's not going to be like the dream team taking an untimely exit. You know what I mean? Right. It's like,
and they got a tough path, man. They're going to have to beat Venezuela, who's been excellent, Cuba, who's probably would be the easiest of the remaining opponents, and then probably Japan.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a reason that they're not the betting favorite here. I mean, like, you look at that lineup and go, like, in what world is this team not favored to win this thing? But I would be surprised if they did.
Yeah, they don't have the pitching. That's the thing. Japan's got the pitching. Venezuela's got some pitching. I think those are the two teams that'll probably play in the final.
Well,
that would be one more game for Team USA, and then those boys are back.
I'm glad, as a real baseball podcast, that we were able to sneak in some WBC talk. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. For Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you listen to these shows. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in.